Science fiction. A genre of speculative fiction that typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts. Cinema boasts an incredibly rich history of science fiction films, ranging from its very inception with films such as Metropolis, to contemporary classics such as Interstellar or Blade Runner 2049.
You look lonely.
But what makes a science fiction film great? What makes a science fiction film great is never its exploration of the future, but its exploration of the now. Whether it's tackling the age-old question, are we alone, as seen in 2001: A Space Odyssey? Or perhaps it tackles the question of what it means to be human, as seen in Blade Runner. There will always be questions that exist, with no definitive answer. It is in this essence that makes On the Silver Globe so incredibly compelling. Cinema's greatest sci-fi film, never made.
Uderzyły mnie, zrobiły na mnie tak szalenie silne wrażenie, to myślę, że też dlatego, że były jak gdyby furtką do wolności.
On the Silver Globe is a Polish science fiction film directed by Andrzej Żuławski, who is most notably recognised for directing the 1981 horror film Possession. An incredibly disturbing film that after an initial limited theatre release, was subsequently banned in the US and UK. This wouldn't be the first time Andrzej faced censorship problems. Żuławski was a truly fearless director who continued to push boundaries as far as he could. Perhaps at times he went too far, but when considering his upbringing, I think it is incredibly easy to see why his outlook on the world was so pessimistic and bleak.
Aby móc się tym zajmować i aby móc utrzymać rodzinę, czyli mnie, a potem moją siostrę, która niestety umarła z głodu, bo jednak warunki były zbyt straszne.
In fact, it would be his childhood and his father's experiences that he would draw from to make his debut feature film, The Third Part of the Night. His father, Miroslav, worked at the Weigel Institute in Nazi-occupied Lviv, which is where the original method of producing the typhus vaccine originated. This is shown in graphic detail within the film, and what we are left with is a film that borders on a nightmare. After a man's wife and young son are murdered by a group of German soldiers, he decides to join the resistance movement where he slowly descends deeper into madness. As the lice are sick, anyone involved in the program is also affected. Their perception of this hellish environment fluctuates alongside their body temperature, from extreme delirium to euphoria. Under such conditions, Michel is faced with various moral dilemmas, which he attempts to solve. With erratic camera work and a chilling score, the third part of the night would serve as an essential foundation for Żuławski's style moving forward.
I kiedy więc powiedziano mi, że mogę zrobić pierwszy film, postanowiłem napisać film o tym dokładnie, żeby jakby dać znać, że wiem, z czego jestem, z jakiej krwi się urodziłem, między innymi tej zatrutej wszami chorymi.
It would be with his second film, 1972's The Devil, that Żuławski would really establish himself. The Devil is once again set in the midst of war, only this time during the Prussian invasion of Poland in the 1790s. A nobleman named Jakub is rescued by a mysterious stranger clad in black. In exchange for his freedom, the stranger wishes to know the identities of his co-conspirators. The Devil is once again an exhaustive watch, but it is also a fascinating film. Żuławski's depiction of the devil is one that shows a coward who simply feeds off of others to do his bidding. But actually, what the devil represents within this film goes far deeper than this. He is an allegory who represents the oppression and political corruption within the Soviet Union puppet state of 1970s Poland. Being the absolute mad lad Maverick that he was, the film caused a huge scandal. Communist Party officials were outraged and disgusted. They wanted to know who funded this film, and, ultimately, the film was banned and shelved. Things were so dire that Żuławski was approached by a high-ranking communist official and was given a passport at a time when Poles were not allowed to possess them. He was given 48 hours to leave Poland, which he did, but at the cost of having to leave his wife and son behind. Having gone to French film school and being able to speak the language, Żuławski fled to France, where he made the 1975 film That Most Important Thing, Love. The film proved to be a huge success, both domestically and internationally, so much so that he was invited back to Poland by the Polish authorities in charge of cultural affairs to make a new film and to resolve the misunderstanding caused by the devil. Unfortunately, upon his return, his marriage would break down and he would find himself in a state of terrible despair. This despair would draw him to what Żuławski proclaimed to be the saddest books he had ever read. A trilogy of books written by his late granduncle, Jerzy Żuławski, titled the Lunar Trilogy, which the film On the Silver Globe is based on. Despite this video being focused on Andrzej, Jerzy Żuławski was equally remarkable in his own right. He was a translator, writer, and philosopher who heavily explored the philosophy of Baruch Spinoza, even writing a dissertation on him titled The Problem of Causality in Spinoza. He would also go on to provide the first Polish translations of some of the works of Nietzsche, as well as others. But undoubtedly his greatest achievement was the Lunar Trilogy, which he wrote between 1901 and 1911. Similar to Andrzej, Jerzy grew up in a time when Polish culture was suppressed, as Poland was occupied by Austria-Hungary, Prussia and Russia. It was a time when there was little optimism for the future. The Lunar Trilogy is an exploration of colonisation, as some of Earth's astronauts find themselves stranded on the moon and go on to form a colony. After several generations, they lose most of their knowledge and are ruled by a religious cult. Interestingly, within the book, Poland is the coloniser and people are forced to speak Polish, the complete opposite of the world Jerzy lived in. It is a very bleak and grim story, but it proved incredibly popular and has been translated into many different languages. Over 60 years after its publication, it still held great relevance to Andrzej and his country's situation. During the mid-1970s, when production began on the film, the Soviet Union was at the height of its power. Poland's culture was once again suppressed, and any dissenting or intelligent things were censored, as Żuławski had already devastatingly found out. And yet, this did not deter Żuławski.
Ten, kto czyni, ma korzenie! To więc czynienie trzeba chcieć poznać!
The production of On the Silver Globe was an enormous undertaking and arguably the biggest ever in Polish cinema's history. The film was shot between Mongolia, where the moon scenes took place, a derelict Polish palace for the world left behind, and the rest of the film largely took place on Poland's Baltic coastline. Costume designer Magdalena Teslowska had to create an entirely new culture and civilization. The whole production was at the forefront of innovation. In fact, it was actually being shot in the same year that George Lucas shot the original Star Wars. If it had been released on time, it would have even predated Star Wars and would have been one of the earliest European sci-fi films ever made. During the earliest days of production, the crew operated like a family. There was a collective fascination with the day-to-day, and the set served as an escape from the dreadful reality and harshness of Poland during this time. But despite Żuławski's best efforts and determination, cracks did begin to appear. It was rare that everything went according to plan, and eventually several crew members were admitted for psychiatric treatment, and some even ran away. All the initial excitement that existed had vanished, and after almost 2 years of filming, everyone was exhausted, and the situation was unsustainable. The crew started to blame each other, especially Żuławski. But even despite such hardships, no one in the crew foresaw what would come next. On June 1st, 1977, work on the film was halted by the decision of Janusz Wilhelmi, the new Vice Minister of Cultural Affairs, on what would be his first day on the job. Despite being 80% complete, all costumes, materials, and unfinished film were ordered to be destroyed. While there is still great speculation as to the exact reason why the production was stopped, it may not have been on censorship or financial grounds, and was most likely more vindictive than that. Żuławski was a filmmaker appreciated both in Poland and abroad, and he was adored in France. The actions taken here are the worst possible punishment for an artist and independent filmmaker, and tragically, none of his fellow Polish filmmakers stood alongside him in solidarity. Żuławski burst into tears when filming was stopped. He was so sorry that they were, and I quote, treating him like dogs lying in the street that you can just kick. Once again, Żuławski felt betrayed by Poland. He was given a passport and ordered to leave the country within 48 hours. On March 16, 1978, a rough screening of On the Silver Globe was privately shown. On this same day, Janusz Wilhelmi, the minister who ordered the halting of the production of On the Silver Globe, tragically died in a plane crash. Camera elements that were ordered to be destroyed were not, and were instead left stacked in the corridors of the film studios in Wrocław, albeit in a non-archived state. Several years later, towards the end of 1985, Żuławski accepted the proposal to complete the film, but it was impossible to complete it as it was. The actors were gone, the costumes were gone, and so was the enthusiasm. For the missing scenes, Żuławski made the decision to add shots of contemporary Poland, which he narrates over as to what would have happened to fill in any narrative gaps. Finally, in 1988, On the Silver Globe would premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, the same year The Devil was also released.
Ta 1/5 z 1977 roku, gdy film unicestwiono, nie zostanie odtworzone nigdy.
On the Silver Globe is a film made up of 3 main acts: Jerzy, Marek, and Jacek. Each of these sections of the film has a distinct feel and is shot in different ways. Firstly, a group of astronauts leave their dying world in order to build a new world that would be better than the one they escaped from. This is Jerzy's act, and this section is mainly shot in the first person. To achieve this, prop cameras and hard drives were built into the costumes, which cinematographer Andrzej Jaroszewicz would wear. After the failure of the astronauts, the expedition sends another man named Maverick, who ends up becoming the messiah of the religion that was created on the moon. In this section, there is lots of dynamic camera movement, stretched space, and distorted close-ups. Back on Earth, Jacek seeks to make contact with Maverick, and this is shot mainly in zoom. Żuławski wanted the actors' complexions to look like porcelain, so a filter was used to absorb warm colours, and colour timing compensated for the filter, resulting in a silvery image. Being an adaptation, there are of course differences between the film and the Lunar trilogy. One key difference is the extensive use of sometimes confusing monologues. Żuławski always took artistic liberties with his dialogue, and you get the sense that there is always a deeper meaning to his use of words. Andrzej's art and life were always intertwined, whether it's in The Third Part of the Night, referencing his childhood, The Devil, referencing his country's oppression, or Possession, referencing his harrowing experience with divorce. His art imitated his life. While On the Silver Globe is clearly not a biopic, the character Marek largely resembles that of Żuławski. Marek's suffering is due to the woman who left him on Earth, a famous woman, once again referencing his separation from his real-life actress wife, Małgorzata Bronek. Then there is some of Marek's dialogue, which were actual entries from Żuławski's own private diary. Marek is a person who wanted to be free from everything, and his suffering turns into the collective suffering of the society he now lives in. He becomes the liberator, leader, and guide. Eventually, however, society turns on their messiah Maverick, just as the crew turned on Zawofsky. The world that has been created starts to rule over those who began the process of creating it. The entire film shows a self-fulfilling prophecy that was meta before meta was even an established thing. While it is a great tragedy that we never got to see the finished film, I believe the shots of contemporary Poland actually makes the film even more fascinating. Two worlds collide, contemporary Poland and On the Silver Globe, or more simply, fiction and reality. What the film illustrates perfectly is the idea that while our lives are not worthless, they are insignificant. We are ultimately as unnecessary as we are destructive, and we never change. Even when the opportunity arises to start anew, we continue to make the same mistakes, a never-ending cycle of life and death. Just as contemporary Poland merges within the film, you have to wonder if On the Silver Globe has merged with our reality. As I sit back and look at our world today, I wonder if we are approaching the end of our cycle. Are we approaching the point of our destruction?